Hey guys, quick question for you. When is the last time you felt like something wasn't fair? So for me, I'm from Toronto. I love the Blue Jays. I'm so sorry, leaders. I'm gonna talk about it one last time. I'll never talk about it again, I promise. But the Toronto Blue Jays blew an 8-1 lead the other weekend and got eliminated from the playoffs again. Basically, I brought a little graph so that we can see how my emotions were that day. So here's my life, okay? So it was 75% disappointment, 15% sadness, 10% bitterness, and 100% unfair. And I'm not even talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs yet because we're trying to keep this video under 8 hours long. So, have you guys ever heard the phrase, life isn't fair? I don't know about you guys, but the first thought that pops into my head almost every time I hear someone say life isn't fair is, well, it should be. Life should be fair. For those of us who have siblings, you know the struggle. Every one of us is constantly on the lookout to make sure things are fair. Like this clip right here.
This isn't fair.
Yes, it is. It's absolutely fair.
I'm getting hungry.
We're doing it my way.
They're getting cold.
You want them divided up fairly or not?
You have more than me.
No, I don't. We all have 29 inches of fries so far. I have 2 4-inchers, 5 3-inchers, and 3 2-inchers. You have 5 5-inchers, and a 4-incher. They're exactly the same. Do we? Okay, we're gonna assume this was a 4-incher from the share pile. 117 minus 3 times 29 divided by 3 minus... We each take a 2-inch bite out of this one. Last week, we had curly fries. It took us 3 hours.
Okay, that was a bit of an exaggeration, but barely. Sometimes unfairness can be the result of being treated poorly, or when we have something that belongs to us and then someone else takes it. It's like the Slurpee that I'm drinking. If someone just came in and drank it without my permission, that would not be cool. Sometimes though, the unfairness people experience in life is way bigger than making sure our siblings have the exact same amount of French fries as we do, or getting upset because someone is sneaking sips out of a Slurpee that doesn't belong to them. I think you guys know what I'm talking about, right? You live in the world just like I do. Most of us are online pretty consistently, so you see some of the things that are happening in the world that are pretty unfair or straight up wrong. Often when I go to open up my phone, it probably takes me less than 2 minutes on Instagram to see something that makes me think to myself, maybe the world needs to change. Hey, what are some of the unfair things you've seen or witnessed at school, on social media, at the mall, in your neighborhood, or in town? These might be small injustices, like the example I gave, but maybe you've seen something way bigger that happened that was really unjust. Turn into the people around you and talk about some examples that come to mind when you think about the world being an unfair place. Okay, so let me just name some of the examples that come to mind for me when I think about injustice and unfairness in the world. Some of these are kind of heavy, so stick with me. When I think about things that are unfair, I think about those of us that are watching this video who've been bullied in the past or are still going through that bullying right now. Most of us just want to be accepted for who we are, right? And then people sometimes still pick on us or make fun of us anyways for no reason. I think about those of us who are trying to do our best to get good grades or be successful, but it just seems like no matter what we do, there's people in our life who make us feel like we're never going to be good enough. And then on a global scale, I think about the people in faraway places who are being affected by climate change way more than we are in Canada, even though they're not the ones causing it. I think about the people in war-torn countries like Ukraine who just want to live their lives, but they're caught up in this crazy conflict most of them have no control over, and most of us don't even really understand. Or what about those that don't even have access to clean food or drinking water? Guys, I could go on and on and on. It's kind of heavy, right? It can be overwhelming to think about, and in fact, it's pretty uncomfortable. Sometimes it's easier just to turn off your brain, put on some Netflix, or scroll through TikTok, just to make sure that that awkward or uncomfortable feeling goes away. Last month, we talked about what it means to be blessed, right? And how being blessed often means something different than what we think it does. One of the things that we talked about, if you remember, is the phrase from Matthew 5, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." Guys, when we hunger and thirst for righteousness, we stop worrying about if we have enough French fries for ourselves, and we begin to look around us to make sure that everyone does. Those things we see in the world that are wrong, what if those things are supposed to make us uncomfortable, right? So that we act to change things. What if instead of turning away from discomfort, we leaned into the spaces of brokenness to bring light into the darkness? For some of us, this conversation fires us up. Maybe others of us are saying, hey, JM, I know there are unfair things in the world, but is it really up to me to help fix them? How do we know when we should step up? But more importantly, why do humans care about fairness and justice in the first place? Like, where did injustice even come from, and who gets to define what justice is? Check this out. You might be a little bit surprised.
If you were a praying mantis, it would be socially acceptable to devour your mate.
And if you're a honey badger, you have no regard for other animals. You don't care.
If you're a panda with twins, it's normal to abandon one to take care of the other.
But if humans do any of these things, we would call it wrong, unfair, or unjust.
Yeah, why is that? Why do humans care so much about justice?
Well, the Bible has a fascinating response to that question. On page 1, humans are set apart from all other creatures as the image of God.
Yeah, God's representatives who rule the world by his definition of good and evil.
And this identity, it's the bedrock of the Bible's view of justice. All humans are equal before God and have the right to be treated with dignity and fairness no matter who you are.
And that would be nice if we all did that. But we know how the world really works.
And the Bible addresses that too. It shows how we are constantly redefining good and evil to our own advantage at the expense of others.
Yeah, self-preservation. And the weaker someone is, the easier it is to take advantage of them.
And so in the biblical story, we see this happening on a personal level, but also in families, and then in communities, and in whole civilizations that create injustice, especially towards the vulnerable. But the story doesn't end there. Out of this whole mess, God chose a man named Abraham to start a new kind of family. Specifically, Abraham was to teach his family to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice.
Yeah, doing righteousness, that's a Bible word I don't really use, but what comes to mind is being a good person.
But what does that even mean, being good? The biblical Hebrew word for righteousness is tzedakah, and it's more specific. It's an ethical standard that refers to right relationships between people. It's about treating others as the image of God,
With the God-given dignity they deserve.
And this word justice, it's the Hebrew word mishpat. It can refer to retributive justice.
Like if I steal something, I pay the consequences.
Exactly. Yet most often in the Bible, mishpat refers to restorative justice. It means going a step further, actually seeking out vulnerable people who are being taken advantage of and helping them.
Yeah, some people call this charity.
But mishpat involves way more. It means taking steps to advocate for the vulnerable and changing social structures to prevent injustice.
So justice and righteousness are about a radical, selfless way of life.
Yeah, and you find this idea all over the Bible. Like here, in the book of Proverbs, what does it mean to bring about just righteousness?
Open your mouth for those who can't speak for themselves.
And what do these words mean for the prophets, like Jeremiah?
Rescue the disadvantaged, and don't tolerate oppression or violence against the immigrant, the orphan, and the widow.
And like here, look in the book of Psalms.
The Lord God upholds justice for the oppressed, gives food to the hungry, and sets the prisoner free. But he thwarts the way of the wicked. Whoa, he thwarts the wicked?
Yeah, in Hebrew, the word wicked is rasha. It means guilty or in the wrong. It refers to someone who mistreats another human, ignoring their dignity as an image of God.
So justice and righteousness is a big deal to God.
Yes, it's what Abraham's family, the Israelites, were to be all about. They ended up as immigrant slaves being oppressed unjustly in Egypt. And so God confronted Egypt's evil, declaring them to be rasha, guilty of injustice. And so he rescued Israel. But the tragic irony of the Old Testament story is that these redeemed people went on to commit the same acts of injustice against the vulnerable. And so God sent prophets who declared Israel guilty.
But they weren't the only ones. There's injustice everywhere.
Yeah, some people actively perpetrate injustice. Others receive benefits or privileges from unjust social structures they take for granted. And sadly, history has shown that when the oppressed gain power, they often become oppressors themselves.
So we all participate in injustice, actively or passively, even unintentionally. We're all the guilty ones.
And so this is the surprising message of the biblical story. God's response to humanity's legacy of injustice is to give us a gift, the life of Jesus. He did righteousness and justice, and yet he died on behalf of the guilty. But then God declared Jesus to be the righteous one when he rose from the dead. And so now Jesus offers his life to the guilty so that they too can be declared righteous before God, not because of anything they've done, but because of what Jesus did for them.
The earliest followers of Jesus experienced this righteousness from God, not just as a new status, but as a power that changed their lives and compelled them to act in surprising new ways.
Yeah, if God declared someone righteous when they didn't deserve it, the only reasonable response is to go and seek righteousness and justice for others.
This is a radical way of life, and it's not always convenient or easy. It's courageously making other people's problems my problems.
This is what Jesus meant by loving your neighbor as yourself. It's about a lifetime commitment fueled by the words of the ancient prophet Micah. God has told you, humans, what is good, and what the Lord requires of you is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Okay, so there were some big Hebrew words in there, but here are my 3 big takeaways about justice. Okay, first thing, all humans are made in God's image and deserve to be treated with kindness and dignity no matter who they are or what their story is. The second thing, justice and righteousness are a big deal to God, you guys, because he cares about everybody and we're all invited to be a part of the solution to the world's problems. And then the third thing is that seeking justice often requires courage because advocating for change is uncomfortable. Speaking of which, what makes it so hard to change the world for the better? What do you guys think? Okay, one last story before I let you guys go. Guys, when I was in middle school, there was this girl who lived on my block. Let's call her Taylor, okay? So Taylor liked hanging out with me and the other guys in my neighborhood. I thought she was pretty cool, but the guys I was hanging around, they didn't really like having her around at all. And secretly, they actually made fun of her when she wasn't listening or wasn't around. I knew the stuff they were saying about Taylor was wrong, but I didn't say anything because I figured, hey, they're just making fun of her when she's not around. No harm, no foul. She doesn't even know it's happening. It's not a big deal. Guys, sometimes big injustices start in small places. One day, these guys decided to take it to the next level. They took something that Taylor was really passionate about, and then they made fun of her for it. They just kept going on and on and on. In fact, they didn't just make fun of her where we were hanging out. When she turned around to go home to get away from them, as people say you should do with bullies, they followed her home, chanting at her. Basically right up to her front door. They did not let up. Guys, I was there. I could have done something. I didn't participate in the bullying, but I also didn't stop it. Things were never quite the same with Taylor and I after that. Not standing up for her is one of my biggest regrets from my teen years. Hey, earlier I asked what it would look like if we didn't lean away from discomfort. What if we were hungry and thirsty for righteousness? Well, I think when we say we follow Jesus, for those of us in the room that say that, we're automatically called to fight for justice because the type of justice that God gives out, it's always rooted in love. Remember I mentioned that uncomfortable feeling you get when you see something wrong happening in the world? Guys, sometimes that feeling is God speaking to you, giving you a glimpse into his heart for justice and inviting you to do something to make a difference. Remember when I said big injustices start in small places? The good news is that big movements of justice also start with small acts of kindness by each of us. Hey, what's one way you want to change the world for the better? What does that look like for you this week?